Hey friends, do I have a concrete story for you? Dionicio Rodriguez may not be a household name, but if you've walked through some of San Antonio's historic parks and gardens, you've probably seen his work without realizing it. He was the master of Faux Bois, French for false wood, a technique that transforms concrete into benches, bridges, railings, and structures that look like real limbs and rustic timber. And some of the finest examples of his work are right here in San Antonio. Today, we are talking about the life, artistry, and legacy of Dionicio Rodriguez, the man who turned cement into art. Visualize this: twisted tree branches made entirely from concrete, rustic benches that look hand-carved from cedar, bridges that appear to be woven from logs and vines, yet have stood for nearly a century. That was Rodriguez's genius. His work wasn't simply decorative, it blurred the line between nature and architecture. Rodriguez was born in Toluca, Mexico in 1891. He learned traditional cement work from his father and eventually developed an extraordinary talent for sculpting concrete by hand. Using simple tools and wet cement, he could imitate bark, knots, grains, and even aging wood textures with astonishing realism. By the 1920s and 1930s, Faux Bois garden work had become a fashionable and wealthy estates in public parks across the United States. But Rodriguez elevated it into fine art, and in San Antonio entered the story. In the 1920s, Rodriguez was brought to San Antonio by Lucy Wilson, a prominent civic leader and conservationist. She recognized his talent and helped introduce him to the local patrons who commissioned work throughout the city. This was during a period when San Antonio was investing heavily in parks, beautification, and public gathering spaces. Rodriguez's naturalistic style fit perfectly with the city's landscapes, springs, and historic character. One of the most famous places to see is his work in the Japanese tea garden. If you visited the garden, you may have crossed one of the rustic-looking bridges or seen the textured benches and railings. Many people assume they're carved wood, but they're not. They're concrete sculptures created by Rodriguez nearly a century ago. His work there blends almost seamlessly into the landscape. That's part of what makes it so remarkable. It doesn't demand attention at first glance. It quietly becomes part of the environment. Another significant location is Brackenridge Park, where Rodriguez created additional Faux Bois features that still survive today. His work also appeared in private estates, cemeteries, gardens, and public spaces throughout Texas and beyond. What's fascinating is that Rodriguez rarely worked with molds. Most pieces were sculpted by hand directly on site. He would shape wet concrete around metal armatures and then carve the surface while the material cured. Each knot, crack, and wood grain line was individually created. Think about that for a second. He wasn't copying nature mechanically. He was studying it closely enough to create it into stone. This style became so recognizable that today preservationists and art historians can often identify Rodriguez's piece just by the texture and craftsmanship. And although San Antonio has some of his most important surviving works, his art spread across the country. You can find Rodriguez's creations in places like Tennessee, Illinois, Kansas, and even North Carolina. But San Antonio remains deeply tied to his story because the city embraced his work and preserved many of his pieces. In many ways, Rodriguez's art reflects San Antonio itself, a blend of craftsmanship, history, nature, and cultural influence. His work feels organic in a city filled with limestone, springs, missions, gardens, and winding pathways. What also makes his story compelling is that for years, many people admired the structures without knowing the artist behind them. Faux Bois was often viewed as a decorative craft rather than a fine art. But over time, Rodriguez gained recognition as one of the most important folk and landscape artists of the early 20th century. Today, surviving Rodriguez works are carefully restored and protected because they're considered culturally significant pieces of public art. Once you know his story, you start noticing his work differently. The bridges aren't just charming features anymore. They become sculptures. The benches become pieces of handcrafted illusions. You realize one man shaped cement so convincingly that generations of people stopped questioning whether it was real wood. That takes extraordinary talent. His legacy is still alive today through the Carlos Cortez studio, where his great-nephew continues the art of Faux Bois craftsmanship. So the next time you visit the Japanese tea garden or walk through Brackenridge Park, pause for a moment and look closely at the details, the grooves in the bark, the twists of the branches, the texture of the rails. I'm Gina Candelario with Cooper Sotheby's International Realty. If you enjoy stories about San Antonio history, architecture, hidden artistry, and the people who shaped this city, be sure to follow along. San Antonio is full of details worth slowing down to notice, and sometimes the most extraordinary stories are hiding in plain sight. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.